Okay, I think this thing's recording now. I'm going to have to apologize. It's a very poor video. Audio is probably really what matters right at the moment. And hopefully the audio will be coming through. This is your instructor for your sociology course. I wanted to make a really quick video or just discussion of what I kind of expect for the discussion forums themselves. It's a lot easier to do this and try to respond to the same question from a whole lot of people. Sometimes I put it in an FAQ, but I thought we would try this semester as we get started. The discussion forums, I call them peer-to-peer discussion forums. Really, the idea there is for you to discuss some basic general study question type things you might see on an exam if we were having exams in the traditional sense. During the course of the semester, things that you might see on an exam, sort of create sort of a study group or a conversation about these things, something to mimic class discussion itself. In the syllabus, you have some guidelines. I think I talk about wanting you to start about 5 threads every module, to have about 15 substantive comments overall over the course of a module in the context of what is usually about 4 to 6 discussion questions per module. Those are rough guidelines. I think 15 is a reasonably minimum number of reasonable contributions, substantive contributions to a discussion over a 2-week period. And it is 2 weeks. It's the kind of thing where, you can engage early on, you can be gone for a day or two, and you can jump back into the conversation. And hopefully, theoretically, what happens over time is that the conversation builds on any given question and people begin to learn. It is peer-to-peer. I will occasionally jump in and make comments. Sometimes I do what's called tagging. You'll notice that perhaps, and sometimes I'll remain completely silent. It just depends. Okay, it's very difficult to read the things and try to make comments to every single thing that goes out there. It's just very, very time consuming. Often what happens is that there's a number of similar themes, number of similar things that might well help answer or inform what students are talking about, what several students are talking about in a lecture class, a face-to-face class, or a live video lecture class. A lot of students have the same questions, and you're able to answer that with one discussion. Having to write that out sometimes, you can cut and paste, but having to write that out multiple times is sometimes kind of difficult. And honestly, the idea of the discussion forums is really not so much for you to show the mastery, okay, or complete understanding of the material like you might attempt to in a test. It really is more of a chance for you to try to discuss these things, work through your learning of these things, come to some learned understanding of what are some pretty complex and complicated and sometimes also very potentially opinionated types of discussions and issues. Okay, so really what I'm looking for, the heart, if you're really trying to understand what I'm looking for, the heart of that can be found if you look at the rubric itself. Okay, forget the quantity for a minute. If the comments you're making show me that you're making an attempt to learn, that you're trying to read, that you're struggling with what are some very difficult concepts at times, and certainly some that are very new. And here in the beginning, quite a few of them, because there's a lot of foundational concepts that apply to any class in sociology or any sociological field, whether we're talking about an introductory sociology class, social problem, or any other subfield within sociology. There's certain foundational concepts and ideas and approaches that are simply necessary to understand, or at least to have some familiarity with, before you can talk sociologically in terms of sociological theories and sociological understanding, in terms of sociological analysis, talk about almost anything. okay, that sociology studies. So these foundational concepts are very important, and they sort of push up to the front of the course in any course such as this, okay, online or face-to-face. There's a lot of concepts earlier in the semester. A language in many ways that we're trying to present to you and build to talk about a much more complex world. So there's a lot of that up front. But again, go back to the discussion questions and discussion forums themselves. What I am looking for is you to make a substantive effort. What I mean by substantive is best defined by looking at the three different levels that I talk about in the rubric. There's the lowest level where it just simply doesn't look like you're reading, doesn't look like you're making much of an effort. You just kind of throwing stuff out there if you did anything. There's a mid-level where, you're making an effort, but you're just it's not quite clicking, and then there's a level where you're making that effort, and while you may not have everything right, nobody has everything right. Nobody, particularly when you're talking about as broad of a discipline as we're talking about here, but where you're, making an effort, and what you're doing is actually showing that you're learning or trying to learn, that it's something that can help others learn. That's when you'll get the 8 to 9, 10 in particular. The 10s obviously are going to be saved for those who do exceptional in terms of the effort they're putting forward in terms of contributing to learning in the course and in terms of their understanding of the material. But there's room there to get a pretty good grade, even if you're not necessarily getting everything perfect. If you're showing that you're, again, that you're reading, you're trying to tie these concepts and these ideas and these things together. Okay. So in the end, what we're after is an individual who is reasonably learned on some very controversial, complicated issues and subjects that do not have necessarily any particular right answer. Okay. And there's not always clear that there's it's not like 2 + 2 = 4 kind of thing. Okay. When we're talking about some of this, excuse me. Making the effort, giving me comments that are thoughtful and thought through enough to show that you're reading, show that you're struggling even, to learn. That's where you're going to be awarded the most points. Okay. Really quickly, the remainder of your, outside of the final exam, the remainder of your scoring with each 2-week module is your quiz, okay, and your writing assignment. The quizzes are pretty straightforward, okay. They're usually true, false, multiple choice, sometimes fill in the blank, a few other types of things of that nature. They are aimed at the concepts more so than anything else. Okay. They really are. We've got to learn certain terms, so they're often aimed at some way at making sure you understand the concept or a particular theory. Okay, they're not meant to be that hard. They may seem random at times, but actually there's certainly I'm not going to give you questions about every single concept that I say is an important concept in the module. I'll have those listed each week. I'm not going to have a question about every one of them, but for the most part, it's selective. It's trying to fill out, okay, are you reading? Are you understanding the meaning of these terms? The writing assignments themselves are not unlike a discussion forum question, okay, or one that might be a discussion forum question that might be posed. Okay, again, each module you've got 4, 5, 6 discussion questions. You don't have to necessarily deal with all of them. It's a good idea to read over and think about all of them and comment maybe a little bit on each of them. But some of y'all will have strengths on some and, do better, be able to help others with certain discussion questions within a module, and ask questions on others in many cases and learn from others. But it's 15 or so substantive comments that I'm expecting across the range of discussion questions. But again, back to the writing assignments. The writing assignments are quite similar to a discussion question, but with them, you're just responding to a particular audience, your instructor, okay? With them, those I want you to, again, it's not necessarily something that's going to require mastery. They're not necessarily questions that always have a concrete right, concrete wrong answer. They're, again, questions that are trying to get after how you're reading, how well you're understanding, are you getting some big picture things. But they are simply you talking to your instructor, okay? I do expect those to, your best effort at getting those things to be in a essay format. Some sort of, they're not thesis papers, but some sort of introduction that talks a little bit about what you're going to be elaborating on. A full-fledged elaboration, discussion, paragraph form discussion of what you're reflecting on, and then a conclusion that sort of wraps up the main points of what you just said. Okay, that format's very, very important. It's very, very important for a number of reasons, and it's going to be very, very important to how I'll grade the writing assignments. Not as important as the substance, but still very, very important. Okay, so please try to follow that format the best you can. Um, there'll be a final exam later. We'll talk more about it. I will have one. I may not have one of these type of things every module. Um, this was just talking really more about syllabus in many ways, and particularly the discussion forums. Occasionally, I may have a discussion like this that summarizes something that I feel like needs to be talked about in the that was in the discussion forums, and I may not. Okay, we'll see how that works out. You'll probably have a few of these over the course of the semesters that are mimicking a class lecture, but don't necessarily expect them on any kind of regular basis. Okay, the important thing in this course is to try to read the material, try to think about the questions that are being asked, try to participate with your peers in that. Write the not weekly but bi-weekly module writing assignments, take the quizzes, do everything on time, and everyone should do well in the course. Okay. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time we do this.